Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and boy have I got something exciting for you today. This is the first ever British wheeled medium vehicle in the game. This is the GSOR 1010 FB, and it is a premium tank that will be available in the game now. Now this video is exciting for a couple of reasons. Number one, in theory this should give us an idea of what the whole new tech tree of British wheeled medium vehicles will look like as they're coming to the game very soon. And also, as this is kind of a new style of tank in the game, aka a wheeled vehicle, which is not a light tank, but I'm sure that a few of you are hoping your hearts are hoping this is going to be a brand new playstyle. Well, kick back, relax, grab a drink, and that's kind of the playstyle you're going to have in this tank as well, as Uncle QuickyBaby lets you know whether the GSOR 1010 is worth it. So it's always tricky to try and figure out what exactly to compare new tanks with inside World of Tanks. I'm going to be comparing the GSOR 1010 to the tech tree Swedish medium tank, the UDES, as well as the Borask. And that is because the GSOR 1010 is using 105mm main armament with 360 alpha damage, which is identical to the other two vehicles in this comparison. Although immediately you'll notice that the GSOR's 1770 damage per minute means that it's got one of the worst damage per minute of any tier 8 medium in the game. However, when you are hitting as hard as the GSOR 1010 at 360, a lot like with the Borask and the UDES, it doesn't take all that long for the damage to start to ramp up. So the GSOR 1010 has 218mm of penetration. On its premium rounds, 252mm of APCR pen. These APCR rounds have 1,250 meters per second shell velocity, while the standard rounds at 920 are not impressive. One of the disappointing things about this tank is it doesn't really get special British high explosive rounds. 460 alpha damage with only 50mm of penetration means that you don't even really need intuition on this tank, as you're not going to be using those HE shells very much. This does mean that this tank has a significant advantage over the Borask when the Borask is firing standard rounds, as it's firing AP and not APCR, but the Borask kind of levels the playing field when you take a look at its APCR rounds. One thing that is nice about the GSOR 1010 is it carries 50 rounds of ammunition, so you're going to have more than enough for all of the kinds of matchups, and you won't be running out of any kind of round. So now let's take a look at the gun handling, and this is where it's really special for the GSOR 1010. 2 seconds aim time, 0.33 accuracy, and rather good gun handling values means that this tank doesn't really need vertical stabilizers, unlike the Borask, which has that horrible aim time and that awful accuracy. This frees up an equipment slot for the GSOR 1010, which will be useful for when we take a look at the other statistics later on. Add to this 8 degrees of gun depression. This thing is rather flexible on a ridgeline, not close to the UDES 14.5, but still way better than the Borask at 6. So far, pretty good news for the GSOR all in all. And this good news kind of continues into the mobility, as you would expect considering this is a wheeled vehicle. Now, unlike the French wheeled vehicles, this vehicle doesn't actually have a speed mode. Just one mode fits all for the GSOR. It goes forwards at 60, backwards at 30, which is really nice. That makes this tank just a touch slower than the Borask forwards, but significantly faster backwards. The power to weight of this vehicle is just under 24 tons, which actually means this vehicle's slower than the UDES, or at least it would be if you didn't take into account the difference in the ground resistances. The GSOR has exactly the same ground resistances as the Borask, so in a straight line, this vehicle is very comparable. However, unlike the wheeled light tanks, Wargaming have given the GSOR 1010 a really bad traverse speed for a medium tank. 30 degrees tank traverse, which becomes less than 30 effective on hard and down to 14 on soft. This turns way worse than a Borask, for example, and everyone knows that the traverse speed on the Borask is probably one of the tank's weaker features. This means that the GSOR 1010 kind of handles a bit more like a drag car than a mobile medium that you would expect from its other statistics. Now let's take a look at the armor of the vehicle. 60mm at the front is really not very good news for the GSOR. And even though the vehicle has okay angling, even if you angle it like this, you might get an auto ricochet from the side. But, well, from the front on the upper hull, but you're not bouncing much with this turret. It's a horrendous turret, and it's got quite extensive side turret here as well that's easy for your opponents to be able to hit. It should also be mentioned that this tank is absolutely gigantic. Let's compare the GSOR to the Borask here. Yeah, we can see who ate all of its fish and chips pretty much every single day of its life. This is a really hard thing to miss, and so GSORs on the battlefield when they get spotted, are going to be one of the easiest, tastiest snacks that you're going to be able to get your hands on. And unlike the EBR 75, which has quite a compact hull, and lots of people think it's got impervious wheels, the GSOR's hull is kind of looming all over the place. I've been absolutely smashed while I've been testing this tank as soon as I get lit up. So to add to this disappointing armor and horrible silhouette, the vehicle has a disappointing hit points total of 1,200, less than a Borask. That's not a durable medium tank. Now, of course, the GSOR does have wheels, which means that the vehicle's less susceptible to being tracked, and it works the same way as with the EBR 75, where you get slowed down instead of stopped in your tracks. However, what I will say, in the 10 or 20 games I played in the GSOR, that my wheels were hardly ever hit. Everyone just hit the center of the vehicle. And unlike an EBR where the wheels are massive compared to the hull, you didn't ever really take those shots to your wheels before you started just losing all of your hit points. And considering that you don't have many hit points to begin with, I didn't even really have to repair my wheels too much, as I was just dead before that even had to happen. Now, considering how vulnerable this vehicle is, how large it is, and how unnimble the vehicle is, one thing that truly sucks about this tank is the camo rating. It has a movement base camo rating of 10. This is awful compared to the UDES's 13 and horrendous compared to the Borask's 14.48. And when you also consider that the vehicle, as I said, is rather large, this is a hard thing to hide inside bushes. And all of this just kind of adds up to a recipe for a disaster for the vehicle, which has another layer of just its horrible view range of 380, one of the worst view ranges of any of the tier 8 medium tanks, which means that even if you're using a premium consumable, you have situational awareness and recon, and you're using vents on this tank, unless they're bond vents, you don't get up to 445 meters view range. And so this means that you kind of have to invest that free equipment slot that you save a vertical stabilizer on to put in coated optics on this tank, which no one really wants to be doing. The news doesn't really get any better when we take a look at the crew of the GSOR 1010, and that is the commander is also the radio operator and a loader on this tank. It also has a gunner who's a loader, and a driver that doesn't have any pressure on them whatsoever. Now, just to clarify, there are no other British medium tanks in the game apart from the Cobra, where the commander is also the radio operator. And considering how bad your view range is on this tank, you're probably going to have to take situational awareness. This means either training up an entire new commander for this tank, or alternatively, wasting a crew slot on maybe your Comet, your Centurion, or your Centurion Action 10. I guess I should be slightly thankful that this vehicle doesn't have very good HE rounds, because I can't really ever recommend anyone also getting intuition on a 3-skill commander, which would be completely wasted on every other vehicle. As for example, the Cobra, the only loader on that tank is actually the gunner. Why Wargaming keep making this a bit of a habit recently with horrible crew loadouts is beyond me, but maybe they'll be addressing it with a revamped Crew 2.0 in the future. But in the meantime, you're going to suffer in this tank. Crew skills that I would recommend in this vehicle, of course, recon, situational awareness, and camouflage will be mandatory on this tank. Brothers in Arms as well. On your driver, there's really not too much pressure there. Probably just preventative maintenance to prevent a fire and some off-road driving to help your awful traverse speed. And on your gunner, I'd probably invest into something like Deadeye to be able to increase some of your crits. All in all, a rather horrible crew loadout. Equipment-wise, this tank is a bit of a tricky one. I personally had 2 builds for this tank. One would be a turbo, a gun rammer, and vents. Now, as I clarified, even with bounty vents and a premium consumable, you can still only get up to 442 meters view range on this tank. And so if you're a free-to-play player who won't use the pudding and tea on this tank, or you don't have a very good commander on this vehicle, which will be most of you, I'd recommend dropping the turbo and using coated optics. For my second build on this tank, I'm going to be doing everything that I can to help the scouting of this vehicle. I'm using coated optics, a commander's vision system, and an exhaust, because even with an exhaust on this vehicle, you can still only get up to 34% camo when moving. And trust me, considering how big and easy this thing is to penetrate, you want to do everything that you can to remain hidden. Field mods wise, I'd recommend improving the vehicle's module durability, improving the vehicle's accuracy, and also further improving the vehicle's concealment, because you really don't have to worry about suspension repair speed on a tank like this, or lowering the vehicle's already amazing reverse speed. And for your slot, I'd recommend taking the scouting, so you can be able to either improve your coated optics or your commander's vision system or your exhaust. Anyway, I think that's quite enough faffing. Let's see how this beast performs on the battlefield. So firstly, we're going to be loading out on Serene Coast, and I'm going to be taking a turbo, a gun rammer, and vents, which will give me the mobility to be able to get into position and the firepower to be able to hopefully deal with our opponents when we get there. As the rate of fire on this vehicle is really not very good, and the base damage per minute is 1,770, you really need to do everything you can to be able to pump this vehicle up if you actually want to kind of deal with your opponents in a pressure situation. Now, a lot of vehicles don't really need damage per minute. Think about the Manticore at tier 10. The reason why that vehicle does well is it's got 390 alpha and it just reliably hits the shots, and it has that kind of like downtime where it naturally hides for that 10 seconds that it takes to get unspotted. The games that I did really well in the GSOR, I kind of had that kind of vibe as well. And considering that even with a gun rammer, vents, and a premium consumable, the rate of fire of this vehicle barely gets below 10 seconds for reloading another shell, then you kind of naturally have that period. Now, of course, your opponents could have designated target, which would mean that you're actually spotted for 12 seconds, or if they're using a directive, then it's more kind of like 14 or even nearer 15 if you're also factoring into cruise skills. So you've still got to be a little bit careful. But, not a good start there for the GSOR 1010, as we hit the side of the guard, but I guess the shell went a little bit low. Must have missed the hull and instead only hit the tracks. Kind of funny, because with these wheeled vehicles, that's what a lot of people complain on these tanks. That, oh, these wheels, they're impossible. You know, they got better armor than an IS-7. Whereas with the EBR, you're literally only hitting the wheels and you're actually missing the hull. As I said, this vehicle so fat that that's really not going to be happening very often. But what I want to show you here is just how accurate and consistent this gun is. It's actually, I'd say, one of the better medium tank guns at tier 8, kind of comparable to something like a Panther II within that regard for the accuracy and being able to just reliably damage your opponents at a decent range. And when you're hitting for 360, sure, you're not whiffing the shells in as quickly as a Borask will. A Borask can fire 2 shells within 2 seconds. But this tank has much better aim time at 2 seconds than the whatever it is, 3.4 seconds that the Borask has. And the bloom after firing is kind of irrelevant because you're going to take 10 seconds to load in that shell. So the gun handling just feels really nice on this vehicle. It doesn't feel like it takes forever to tame. But on the other hand, the Borask, you know, it does have that really good gun handling as well, just like this. Although this thing with the turret traverse dispersion at 0.06, that is one of the highlights of this vehicle. And while I'm sure that some of you would probably still want to take vert stabs anyway if you absolutely, utterly want to have amazing gun handling, I just think there are better pieces of equipment to take on this tank. Even increasing the speed. Because as we can see, it's fairly fast, but the traverse speed on this tank is just a little bit awkward. While I'm talking about the traverse speed of this vehicle, I should highlight that it's perfectly possible to be able to turn this tank on the spot. You do not have to, like in an EBR, kind of drive forwards while turning at the same time, creating these really awkward situations where you either get stuck on a wall. So I was quite surprised that I got shot there, and then it dawned on me, oh, there's an LHMTV. And the LHMTV must have just driven up there. But we're not really able to worry about that right now because I got to try and get the shots in. And when I'm trying to spot the Lansen, and I'm also spotting the 56 TP, I also want to try and get some damage in myself, right, to be able to pick apart my opponents. And this thing, it hits. It's accurate. It's got good aim time. Quickly you can reach that awesome maximum accuracy of 0.33. And if this vehicle does have any strength at all, it is that it's able to deliver those shots and be a little bit cheeky. So we finally dig out the LHMTV, but unfortunately we're now down after taking a hit from the 56 TP to being a one-shot from this LHMTV pretty much about 4 times out of 10. And unfortunately, because of the lack of the reload on this tank, we're unable to be able to get the extra shot in to be able to finish off the tier 8 British light tank. So now I'm in an awkward scenario where I'm a one-shot for pretty much everyone apart from the ELC even 90. But still, with an intuition switch out there, so I've got a gold round for the front of the 56 TP hull, which is entirely unnecessary. I could have very easily just loaded armor-piercing rounds here, been able to go through the front of the hull. Hitting for 360 adds up. We've kind of got the same alpha damage as an SDB-1, and while the SDB-1 is kind of firing in like half the time that the GSOR 1010 does, literally, it still adds up, and I'm constantly surprised about how tanks with low damage per minute but relatively good alpha like this one can just still outperform vehicles that were to have higher damage per minute but have that low alpha. So unfortunately the Scorpion pushes me around the corner here. Not a big deal. I'm just looking back behind me to make sure he's not going to do the same thing again. And hopefully we're going to be able to reload to be able to get this AMX now. And we secure our second kill of the game. Unfortunately now we attract the attention of the T-32 and I'm getting pushed sideways here, so I was unable to get an extra shot onto the T-32's front of the hull. Luckily we managed to go through him, and now I'm in an awkward situation where I'm literally trying to just get out of the way of this Scorpion, but they reversed into me. And unfortunately for us, we don't pick up the kill as the TS-54, and I don't know, I guess the Scorpion pushed me around the corner and now I've accidentally bumped into him a few times and we're having a little bit of an argy-bargy. But oh well. Let's just get forward and see if we can still be able to pick up some more kills. And with the gun handling that this tank has with that turret traverse, it is rather decent indeed as we pick up, I believe, our third kill of the game. Alright, so this is pretty much just the GSOR. This is as good as the GSOR as gets, really. Sure, it can be snipey. I've shown you the sniping. But you also have to have this, shall we say, this frenetic gameplay, and you really have to try and like link in your shells in between your opponents. And luckily with the reverse speed on this tank being a fantastic 30, that means that you are able to kind of like pull back around the corner. So ELC dive bombs here. I put a shot into the back of their tank. The Skoda misses one shell, which means that it's unlikely that they're going to finish off the ELC in a single shot. And I decide that I'm going to ram the French tank. But I actually miss, and then somehow that shell misses as well. I have no idea how that happens, but luckily we reversed into the way of the ELC even 90 to be able to finish him off. And just like that, a half-decent game for the GSOR 1010. It's nothing super fancy, but there's nothing super fancy about this tank. Still, we got the job done. This was an ace tanker for 1,307 base experience, 3,782 damage, and because I don't believe we fired many gold rounds, a nice 83,000 credits profit. So now we're going to be rolling out on steps inside another all tier 8 match up, and I'm going to be using the same build. We're going to be running turbo, gun rammer, and vents. And it looks like that Progetto Force T6 has already noticed. Just for scale, that's a Progetto, and this is a GSOR. I mean, the GSOR literally makes the Progetto small in this situation, and I really found that with how easy it is to be able to hit this tank. And I'm honestly not really too intimidated about this tank going into the battlefield soon. Sure, it's going to be annoying because it does hit hard and it is going to hit you very consistently, but as soon as it gets spotted out, and trust me, as you're going to see in the gameplay today, it gets spotted out a lot, it's really not too bad. It's a big old easy tank to hit, and I'm sure that a lot of people are probably going to consider even taking a few high explosive guns out to the battlefield as this vehicle is released to be able to to take advantage of that. But look at those snaps. Really, this is where this tank is at its most happy. It's using its 8 degrees of gun depression. It's putting out its feelers with its vision, or hopefully shooting for things that its allies are spotting, and just dumping in the rounds. And that is where you are going to have to get the GSOR 1010. Now, I'm not actually going to show you much of my second build in this video, where I'm going to be using a vision system and exhaust. But I really think that Wargaming might have missed things a little bit with this tank with regards to the camera rating, because it's just so darn large. And it really makes me worry for the future of the British wheeled mediums, as that what are Wargaming really trying to go for with this vehicle? Honestly, the wheels, they don't even really make that much of a difference. I feel like the wheels are the novelty of this tank, and funnily enough, they have pretty much no implication to the gameplay, because at least with this tank, it's so large and so fragile that unlike an EBR, which is really quick and really small, and the wheels actually keep you moving to be able to avoid taking the damage, this thing just takes it anyway, which makes the wheels irrelevant. It really makes no difference. If you get hit once in this tank, you're pretty much on 2/3 of your hit points. If you get hit twice, you're down to 1/3 of your hit points, because we're not really meeting those tier 6 and tier 7 tanks. And some tier 7 tanks can still 3-shot this vehicle. And so the outcome is, and oh man, look at those snipes. 4 rounds out of 4 into the AMX M449. The outcome is that the wheels are irrelevant. The wheels are meant to be such a big feature on a tank like an EBR. You can keep going even if your tracks get hit, unlike other tanks. With the GSOR 1010, your wheels aren't really getting hit in the first place, and if they are, well, your tank's still getting damaged anyway. And the tank's not fast enough. This is with a turbo, even at 65, and with its slow traverse speed, as we can see here, that it's not avoiding anything. And so we kind of have this little bit of an enigma of the battlefield. It's really not special in any way, apart from the novelty of having the wheels, which have no implication. I'd say its gun isn't exactly super special. You've got vehicles like the 122 TM that, while they don't quite have as much view range at 370, have way better armor, and not that much worse damage per minute than this tank, but they have better standard pen, with APCR rounds as standard, and also 300mm of heat pen, and they hit for 400. And then you really start to think that, apart from the speed advantage that this vehicle has, I guess, is the reverse speed going to be the thing that really clinches it for a lot of players? Unfortunately, we didn't even scratch them there against the T103, which means they are still healthy enough. But at this kind of range, I'd be surprised if the Scorpion does spot me. We managed to track them, and unfortunately, I do get spotted. And even though we can go backwards with a turbo at 30, even after taking the field mod that slows us down a little bit, it's just such an easy tank to hit. And as soon as you're spotted, unlike an EBR that would have been going backwards at 75 there, we're in trouble in the GSOR. Now if you think, oh, why don't you just drive the vehicle backwards to engage your opponents and then drive forwards to be able to run away from them, then you have this big old British butt hanging over the back. And you've only got 1 degree of gun depression over the rear of this vehicle, which kind of prevents you from being able to do that. So all in all, you end up with this kind of like really awkward situation for the GSOR 1010, where it has all of these features that should make sense, but don't actually feel as if they add anything to the gameplay or really kind of just matter in the end. And I feel like that is the kind of conclusion that I'm almost coming to with the GSOR 1010, is that it's really a tank that just doesn't matter. And unless Wargaming do something a little bit more special for the tech tree tanks, maybe give them 2 speed modes, or give them some kind of novel feature, maybe some HESH rounds, or give them a gun that has, I don't know, good shell velocity or anything. I just can't even really imagine that the British wheeled medium tech tree is going to be all of that special. Nevertheless, that was 5,000 combined in 5 minutes, which I also want to highlight something, and that is this tank was literally hard capped in this game by that damage per minute. I couldn't carry this game because I couldn't snowball the flank quick enough. I was pretty much hitting all of my shots. No doubt the vehicle was consistent, but you can't replace raw DPM on tanks for when it comes to just needing to be able to demolish whatever is in front of you and then be able to say get back to base or be able to assist the other flank. And while we get a tank sniper medal here and we do like triple the damage of anyone else on our team, unfortunately in World of Tanks quite often you're not competing with your team, you're having to compete with power players on the enemy team who might be playing better tanks with better armor and better damage per minute. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how the GSOR 1010 performs against tier 10 tanks. And right at the end I actually chickened out of using the exhaust and the vision system, because I thought on this map it's not really about having the best camo, because you use bushes to be able to do that work for you. It's not really also about having the best vision system to be able to dig your opponents out of bushes necessarily. But having a turbo on this tank with the gun rammer and the vent might actually allow me to have the damage per minute, but also importantly the speed to be able to get into a position. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for the GSOR 1010 to take early positions. Right, so not about the GSOR 1010 for a second. The way that you knock down these trees is oh so important. You want to go knock down, check for blind fires. Then you want to go and you want to try and align this bush, this tree up like that again. And the next one you actually want to swing slightly further out and then knock it down at that kind of an angle. And then what this does is it creates a whole bush line. And look, even a tank like this that has mediocre camo rating while moving doesn't get spotted. And now I've created the perfect opportunity here with all of these trees fallen, a whole bush line so I can be able to traverse across, but also just go out and hopefully start to just dump some rounds in. And you're going to see how the damage will add up for the GSOR. There you go, a tier 10 tank. That was a regular round right through the side of the 260. Unfortunately, I'm going to get spotted there. Alright, so this gameplay is going to be so slow that I'm going to speed it up by a couple of notches and just show you how all the damage can add up. Unfortunately, the A phase 1 blind fires us. We're going to wait for the perfect opportunity when the A phase 1 goes away and also put a round into the lower plate of the 260. Now, in this kind of a situation, what you want to do is you always want to stay behind the rock for an extra 1 or 2 seconds past that 10-second period. Because, as I mentioned, you are spotted for 10 seconds after your opponents can no longer see you. But if they've got designated target, and you can almost be certain that reward vehicles have got designated target, that they are going to be able to catch you for those 12 seconds instead. And if they're using a directive, which I don't think heavy tanks would be using, that would be 14 seconds. But if you're playing against a medium tank that you think is highly focused on spotting, or definitely light tanks, you should probably stay hit head for 14. And as I mentioned, the GSOR has a natural 10-second reload with a gun rammer and vents. In this kind of a situation, I really don't need the gun rammer, and I think it'd probably be better to either focus on, probably not an aiming device, but maybe an exhaust with vents and a turbo for this kind of a situation. But unfortunately, you can only have 2 builds, right? And so I think it's about trying to create 2 builds that match most of the maps that you are going to play. And I feel like this build I would use on pretty much every single map, apart from the real bushy ones, like Malinovka, Prokhorovka, Muravanka, and then maybe some of the funky maps like Westfield if you really wanted to play the bushes towards the south, or Live Oaks if you wanted to go and try and play the bushes towards the south with the intent of digging out a load of tank destroyers. Honestly, this vehicle, you could probably even get away with dropping a gun rammer on it in this kind of a scenario, because you just have to stay hidden anyway. And unlike something like a Borask, where it's like you dump out those 2 rounds and then you fall back and you reload, you really just have to stay hidden for so long inside this vehicle. So you really got to watch out for that. And I don't think there's going to be any one individual way to set this vehicle up equipment-wise that is going to be the best. Although this gun rammer vent setup has been working out for me. The vents will be quite nice on this vehicle as well, because without them, your view range is going to be awful. So I think a lot of people would probably be looking to maybe even use something like Vents Turbo Coated Optics on this tank. Could be quite nice. If you are an extreme player, and you know that you absolutely, utterly want to play this vehicle tons and tons and tons, it's going to become your favorite vehicle, you might want to even squeeze Bond Vents on this tank. Because if you put Bond Vents on this vehicle along with a premium consumable, that would mean that you would actually get up to 445 meters view range, even without coated optics. Now this would allow you to have a full damage build of like Bond Vents with a gun rammer, and then maybe a turbo or vert stabs. It would also allow you then, for your spotting build, to not have to use coated optics there, which would free you up to use vents, a vision system, and exhaust. And that would allow you to also still have some combat capacity as well. So I have to admit, the responsiveness of this gun just feels nice. Kind of feels a bit more like a tier 9 medium tank within that regard, and we're easily able to loop that shell around the corner against the Basante. And even in this tier 10 matchup, for which most of the damage that we dealt was against tier 9 and tier 10s, we've had a decent round up until I decided to rush that Foch. A more sensible play would have been to just hang on that corner and probably just come up and try and shoot the weak point. And so we make a little bit of a big fail towards the end. Nevertheless, we managed to get a tank sniper medal here. We did the most damage by half in this tier 10 game with 1,199 base. And even though we fired some gold rounds, as this is a full-blooded premium tank, we make a cool 50k profit. So, all in all, the GSOR 1010, to conclude my opinion on it, this is a vehicle that for me is just a little bit disappointing. I thought that the wheels were going to mean more, they really didn't. The fact that this vehicle goes backwards, not really that much more exceptionally quickly than something like an SWB1, for example, just means that it has no features. It's not a bad gun, that's for sure. The vehicle doesn't have bad top speed in a straight line or reverse speed, but the lack of the ability for the wheels to fully traverse means that you just end up just feeling like you're being a little bit sluggish, and genuinely the Borask feels faster for me. The fact that the hull is huge and fragile means that the wheels are pretty irrelevant. If they get hit, you're losing 1/3 of your hit points, so you use your repair kit, you lose 2/3 of your hit points, and then you're dead for the next shot. This isn't like an EBR where the wheels really do end up making the vehicle very, very good indeed. And because this vehicle doesn't go exceptionally quickly, Nobody's really missing those shots and only hitting the wheels anyway. Nobody has trouble hitting like a Leopard 1, for example. This tank is slower than a Leopard 1. While unfortunately its silhouette is pretty much the same kind of size. And when you also factor in that the vehicle has view range that's low enough so that unless you do have every single cruise skill and a premium consumable, you have to kind of waste an equipment slot on coated optics, unlike its competition, the Borask, which can slap an exhaust in there, and also add into the fact that this has one of the most annoying crew loadouts in World of Tanks, where you're going to have to sacrifice your commander's situational awareness, and also the fact that the ammunition is quite expensive at 1,200 per shot. And honestly, it means that this tank ends up being a little bit of a stinker, and I actually wouldn't recommend it for most of the player base. 80 or 90% of World of Tanks players will do better in something like a Centurion 5.1 than they will do in the GSOR 1010. However, for the very high-end players who have mastered scouting and vision mechanics inside the game and will be able to use that speed to be able to get themselves into positions before they need to be there, then this could still end up being a decent tank. All in all, personally, a disappointment for me. Doesn't bring anything new to the game and could easily have been tweaked in a few areas to make it, all in all, a more fun experience. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video on the GSOR 1010. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the first medium tank that has wheels. And finally, just a heads up that if you're watching this video as it's released on Thursday, later on today I'm going to be streaming with new drops so you can be able to get extra anniversary tokens, where you can get a whole list of goodies inside Wargaming's 13th anniversary store. Personally, for me, I'm going to be saving up and going straight for the piece of improved equipment, aka bond equipment, that I might even be slapping on this tank. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.